This week's Torah portion is Deuteronomy. It's Parshas Devarim. It's the very first parsha in the book of Devarim in Hebrew, but the book of Deuteronomy in English. And I do have to point out, what does Deuteronomy even mean? And it's really broken up into two separate words, deutero and nomos or nami. And deutero is second, and nomos is law. So it's really the second telling of the law. It's the repetition of the law. And by the way, Edie, just so you know, Rambam, so Maimonides, when he wrote the Mishnah Torah, it's the same thing. It's the repetition of the Torah. That Rambam, that Maimonides, when he wrote the Mishnah Torah, he wrote it as like, this is the second telling of the Torah. And that's why he also wrote, no one ever needs to write another book again, because I'm writing everything in, of course.
Yeah. Just read my book. It's the best one.
Right. And then, of course, the great irony is that many people wrote books on his book. And okay. And
this compounded the whole mess.
Right. And
yeah, this the second telling of the law versus a bunch of words, which is Devarim.
That's nice. Not just a bunch of stuff. It's not just a bunch of words. But yeah, the Deuteronomy, the Mishnah Torah, it's the second telling of the Torah, because many of the commandments found within the book of Deuteronomy are repetitions from what we saw in the previous several books of the Torah. Most of them, books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, but some even from the book of Genesis. Now, we have, as Edie points out, it's also named because one of the first words in this week and the book's telling is Devarim, Elah Devarim. These are the things, these are the words. And there's a lot of stuff. Right, I like the way he put it. There's a lot of things that happen, a lot of words that happen in this book, and certainly in this, although in this parsha, but it's actually fitting because this parsha of Devarim really sets up the entirety for the rest of the book. Now, we don't always get that sense in some of the other books of the Torah, but here it really, really is the case. Is Moses. It's really the book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final, it's his final set of speeches. And so he's going through everything. And yeah, he has some stuff to say in this week's Parsha for sure. But really what it does is it sets up a context, a historical context for everything subsequent to this. So I have found some cute graphs, some cute charts around on the internet. So for instance, here's one of them. We have this cute little thing that someone made on, it looks to be a whiteboard with colorful dry erase markers. And we have in this week's Parsha, we have this stuff here, which is like the introduction. Although actually the Parsha is chapters 1 through basically the 22nd verse of chapter 3. So it's really not that much. It's more like this. So it's really the introduction. We don't even actually get the God speaking the law. We don't even get that really. This is, you know what? It's like even before all this. So actually,
get this one. Moses assembles the people. That's what he does.
Yeah, that's basically. And here's a different one, just for a different context for the outlining of Deuteronomy, which is we have. It's more of this stuff. Yep,
that's it.
So it's right here. It's a historical prologue. And ultimately, as you can tell, there's these different bits of chunks of stuff going on. There's a preamble, the failure to enter the land, desert wandering, Sichon defeated, Og defeated, division of the land, call to obey, all that good stuff. So those are some cute little colorful things. I have a not cute, not colorful thing. I'm sorry. That's life. But it's nevertheless still helpful in considering what's going on. So I like to call this the Travelogue context. That's my renaming for this week's Torah portion is the Travelogue context. It's all about travel. And, you know, it's interesting. Moses could have just said, I told you this, I told you that, I told you this, I told you that. But instead, he says, well, we traveled from this place and this place. I told you this happened here. And then we went somewhere else. And then this happened there. And then we went somewhere else. And then, you know. And so that's what's going on. So so here in this week's portion, we have we have basically the introduction to the introduction. This is all an introduction and setting. And so first Moses sets up the setting for the setting, okay? And then they arrive at Horeb, and God says, here's the land of Canaan. Go take it, possess it. It's yours for the taking. Now, he doesn't say it's like taking candy from a baby, but basically it's yours. Go take it.
Yeah,
So,
he will be there to help us fight.
Yep. And then while they're still at Horeb, Moses delegates adjudication. And this is the stuff that happens in Parshas Yitro, where Moses' father-in-law comes to him and says, in the book of Exodus, says, you're so busy. You're spending all entire day long sitting there judging everybody. This is too much for one person to bear. You need to delegate.
But he also said it in such a way, which is you're being rotten to your people because you're making them stand around and wait on you.
Right.
He points out that Moses is being a bit of a bottleneck.
A lot of a bottleneck. And it's actually, and then it becomes a win-win situation for Moses to delegate. Moses doesn't have to do everything, which is too much for him. And it's also better for everybody standing around waiting with their ridiculous weights. Mm-hmm. So then they travel from Horeb to this place called Kadesh Barnea. And this is a really fascinating thing about the land, because God says, hey, go take the land. And the Israelites say, well, maybe we should check it out first. Let's have a sample visit. And they're not so into it. No, let's not. We're not so keen on this. But then meanwhile, there's a whole other set of subset that say, no, like they're super zealous. No, we got to go. We got to go fight. And God says, literally, don't do that. And they go ahead and do it anyways. And they get routed. Many of them die. And it's a super duper unsuccessful. So it's a really fascinating juxtaposition where God tells the majority of the people, you need to go up and take the land. They hesitate. They say, well, we're really scared. It's got some really huge people there with big cities and big fruits. I don't know about that. And you have a small minority who are zealous, and they say, we're going to ignore the command of God. They basically go and try to conquer the land when they are going against, when they should be. So it doesn't work out. So we have all that. And then moving along, just to get a sort of the structure of the parsha. Then, so after this really unfortunate getting routed section, they have the very beginning of chapter 2, where they go into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea, and they hang around Mount Seir for many days. Now, it could be for many years, for all we know, that they were just hanging out by Mount Seir. And they also go around as part of their wandering wilderness ways that they go through. They have interactions with the people or the land of Esau, and then also Moab and Ammon, and they are not so friendly. It doesn't exactly go the best ways, but these are different interactions where they're just sort of skirting along the lands and having these interactions. And then after doing that, then they go to the land of Bashan, which also has this guy named Og HaBashan, who has this like massive bed. Apparently he's a huge guy. And we even have in this week's Torah portion telling us he had a really huge bed made out of iron, which is like, we don't need to know that. That's not pertinent details, and yet it's
very unusual.
It's super random. And it's literally like someone's telling you a story, and by the way, they're really huge. This is how big their bed was. Like, I don't, you're telling me about the conquering of the land. You don't need to tell me about people's bed sizes, but it's in this week's Torah portion. It's there. It's also Torah.
It's Torah.
It's also
there must be a reason.
Yep. And then finally we get, and this is kind of following up on the conquering of the land of Bashan, we get the apportioning of this land to the 2.5 tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. And it's kind of a follow-up to this. But basically, these are all these lands plus these lands. And these lands, by the way, are all east of the Jordan. I should make sure to mention that. These are not part of, they're not part and parcel of the land of Canaan. They're to the east of the Jordan River. Okay? So these are sort of bonus lands, if you will.
Yeah.
that ultimately get settled. These 2.5 tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. So this is all, like I mentioned, this is all in the way of setting a background, a historical background context to everything else that's going to take place in the book of Deuteronomy, which are all these different laws and settings. So now that I just laid out basically what this week's Torah portion is about, I really also want to think about and talk about how traveling and different physical and geographical settings in our lives can create context for what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And add on to experiences that make us who we are.
Yeah.
So that's context as well, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. Edie, I am super tempted, by the way, to talk about Ogo Bashan's bed. It has really nothing to do with anything.
Although obviously you're hung up on the context of this, and if you were on the trip with these original Israelites, you'd probably be like, "Can we take it with us? It's really cool."
Yeah, I mean,
experience
right,
that or something.
Right, to take that bed. I think ultimately, really, why they're saying this is because he's such a massive person. Can you believe we defeated him in combat? That even such a large, massive man, even we were able to beat him.
Well, and this is where it's interesting to me because part of the audience of Moses for these speeches are not those original folks that got out of Egypt with him. It's their kids and or their grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So these people who maybe they weren't there for the first bunch of adventures. And they need to see, here's what's formed your parents, and here's the experiences we've had together, even if you weren't exactly there for that particular conquering of Og.
Yeah, you're right. There was transition.
Yeah.
Even though probably some of these conquering aspects were done more, to maybe the more of the generation entering into the land of Israel. So at least for them, and certainly the addressees of the book of Deuteronomy, and certainly even this contextualization. I still think, having all of that. Now, that having been said, what's really fascinating is what is not in this week's Torah portion, right? We want to talk about historical context. We're really only starting from God at Horeb talking about go possess the land. And that's really, I mean, thinking about what we're talking about in this week's Torah portion, we're not talking about, all the way back in Egypt or all these different travails we had out in the desert between Egypt and now. This is really all about you go possess the land. Yes, we had some, I told you to go, you checked it out, weren't so keen on it. You had a showing of the land, if you will, right? You had a buyer's preview, and then you said no, and then some other people went when they shouldn't have gone, and then they got killed, and then
of fire, smoke, and Sinai.
Right, and also, yeah, you went to the east of the land, right? You went to the east of Jordan. You got Ammon, Moab, Esau. You got the Bashan land. That's all great and all, but that's not actually the land we should be talking about, which is the land of Canaan.
Yep.
So it's literally just as the Israelites were skirting the lands of Moab and even Esau, they're also skirting the land that they really need to be getting into, which is the land of Canaan. And I mean, what also I think comes through, not so many words, but what I'm getting is that there's an anxiety there. The people, they're highly anxious about actually going into the land of Canaan. They left the land of Egypt, and these might even be their descendants. They might not, it's 40 years later, and yet they too are still having, I don't know, should we really go? We're not so, just be like, this is the land. Literally, God is literally giving this land to you. He's telling you, go and take the land. Well, I don't know. Let's get a second.
Maybe they're afraid to finish it.
I think they are. I mean, on the one hand, you could certainly say, well, they're getting fed the man every day. This is some nice stuff. They're having, they don't really have to work for this stuff. They're just hanging out. Literally, one of the stops that they live in is for 19 years.
Now they actually have to set up a government, don't they?
That's something also, but they also have to work the land, find land for their cattle, be involved in agriculture. So it's not, so that could be also holding them back to some degree, being taken care of by God with the man, with water, and hanging out in the wilderness on the way, and then now you're, here you go. Here's literally the promised land that you're supposed to be going to, but you're going to have to fight the big people who are there, maybe fortified cities, and it's going to be a real travail. It's a lot of hard work. There can definitely, it's almost like a maturation process, a rite of passage that they're forced to basically grow up. It's nice to be coddled in your parents' home and just being fed and having shelter and all that good stuff, and yet, literally, by the way, even the shelter, right? Because we see one of the commandments for Sukkot is you need to dwell in booths for a week because I caused you to dwell in shelters and booths out in the desert. So God's literally giving them food with man, water with water, and shelter with these booths. So God's giving them all these things that they don't have to work for.
And now they're being pushed out of the nest.
Right, they're being pushed out of the nest, and they have to transition now to adulting. They really have to step up and go out and adult on their own. They have to first fight and win their way against the fortified inhabitants of the land who know the land better than them. They also have to then, create, farm crops, do the cattle, and it's going to be tough. And like you said, also govern themselves, self-governing. They have to set up governmental bodies and adjudication councils. So,
well, and they know they're going to lose Moses because he's discussed that at least once earlier, and which also means that really is all on their own. It just, when you're putting it that way, now it's like, well, we've seen it, but we've always had Moses to lean on, and Moses, Aaron, and Miriam are all gone, and they are having to adult more thoroughly. And they have government, but it's going to be a little different. They sort of have government. They have the adjudication and the delegation of duties that Moses had set up, and he's reminding them of that as he's like, and now we're going to cross. Okay, guys, ready? And they're like, tell us another story, Dad.
Yeah, they definitely have to. They're being kicked out and forced to grow up.
Yeah.
It's interesting also thinking of changing of generations, and this is just super aside and really doesn't connect, but I was just thinking about the heroes of the original trilogy of Star Wars, where you have Han, Leia, to some degree Chewie, but also Luke, and they're the heroes, but by the time 30 years later comes, they're passing along, and you need a new generation to come and pass it along or just be bitter about things, right?
Well, and they're going to try not to be
right. So Leia is happy to pass things along, right? She's going to share her knowledge and all that good stuff. So she's kind of like Moses, where she's more in the sharing mood. You have Luke, who is super embittered, right? He's embittered by the turns of life, and he really doesn't want to be involved with this anymore, right? I don't have a good parallel here for our stuff, but you could certainly see a totally different model. Moses doesn't have to be someone easily handing this baton off to Joshua.
But he has consistently done so. I mean, even from the time when God originally tells him he's not allowed to enter the promised land because of what he did at the bitter water, Meribah, by striking the rock instead of just talking to it. When God then tells him a little bit later in Numbers, oh, you're going to die after this happens, he doesn't go, oh, please don't. It's like, oh, who's going to succeed me? That's where we get that, Joshua. I was actually reading, as part of the Torah portion, I was reading an aside from A Year with Mordecai Kaplan, and from Viktor Frankl's In Search of Meaning book, which is when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves, which the Israelites know, hey, we've got to go. Moses is going to die here momentarily. We can't just sit here. The Israelites are definitely talking about the fact that they need, something's got to change. They, as you were pointing out, Rabbi Drew, they can't stay in this artificial
cocoon
traveling. They have to go.
But we can't stay in this one.
Yeah.
We can't stay in this either. They have to make some changes.
That's right. They have to grow up.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah, they have to grow up.
And nobody
Well,
voluntarily leaves
but-
home. Well, some people. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Deb. Go ahead.
but by growing up in this environment, it can bring about death.
They could, are you saying they could fail, right? They could then, because they've been sort of in this cocoon by God, being helped and fed and sheltered, but now they have to strike it out on their own and fight the inhabitants that this is a risky.
Yes, when they leave out, yes, they have to fight for their independence, but when we leave out, we have to fight for our life with the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in our present context, yeah.
And
In our present situation.
I think that's still related in that Moses is reminding them, the Israelites, here are the successes you guys have had and your families have had. You know, we've all been moving toward this common goal. And I think if we had, and Moses was an amazingly strong leader, showing that sort of united vision of let's get across this, even if I personally, Moses would say, don't get to go. But then what's also happening, if we think about ourselves, okay, yeah, we don't have a vaccine for COVID right now, but we didn't have a vaccine for polio for a while either. There was eventually one developed. I think if we had strong leaders who could remind us of the challenges we've overcome as a country, it would help. You know, hey, we fought this before. We figured this out. We can do this if we're united and we think about this goal. And I think that's part of what Moses is starting to remind them of. And even, Rabbi Drew, when you were talking about the Gadites and the Reubenites, they had different animals, they had different livestock. So they need a different type of land. And he goes, okay, you're going to be on that east side of the river, but you're still with us, and you're still going to fight with us to make the goal happen of this common homeland, this common victory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's expressing the vision, and I think that's one of the things Moses is doing in the first part of, in this first parsha, is reminding them of their victories. You can do this, you have done. Maybe he knows they don't actually want to cross, Rabbi Drew.
They don't want to what?
They don't actually. Maybe he suspects they don't actually want to cross.
Right. I think he's calling out their anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
They're anxious about actually entering the land and having to take up these responsibilities as well as the risks, even though the opportunities are incredible, right? They get to have their own land, and they would be doing right by God, right? This is what they're being commanded to do. So there's all this adulting stuff. I think I'm really intrigued by this because this isn't a whole backstory. This isn't an entire, even though he'll obviously talk about some other things in the, like, spoiler, later on in the book of Deuteronomy, there's some more storytelling. But but as far as this particular parsha and setting up this like travelogue narrative, it's really hyper focused on the land itself.
Mm-hmm.
The land. And I think there's something to be said that when we tell our own stories, to be aware of our own anxieties and calling those out, even in talking to someone else, like, you know, I have some thoughts, here's some advice, here's some stuff I want to share with you, but let me tell you where I'm coming from. Here's what is driving either my current or even my past anxieties around some of these issues. And I think that's what's going on. I think that's such a fascinating model that Moses is setting, that he's calling out the national anxieties and saying, these are things you got to get over, right? This is our past. These are things we've been dealing with. We need to process this. One of the things that inspired me for this week is even what you were talking about in our last week's conversation about your travel for a year or two in the South, and some of the experiences and what you had down there. And I think a lot of people experience different things, especially if they're living somewhere for a year or two, or even at some point the Jewish people were living somewhere for 19 years in their wanderings. But definitely people experience and have various growth things or realizations. And I was thinking about the Jewish people here, the Israelites, the Bnei Israel, because what they experience in different places. I know I've had that. Edie, I know you've moved around different places, and Deb, you mentioned that last week. And so it's, and even what you were saying about how you got treated differently just by having plates from west of the Mississippi.
Differently, not necessarily better, but it also changes you on how would you then
Yes.
treat a stranger or someone with a license plate from somewhere else.
Mhm.
Does it make you kinder or not based on what you've been through? So, I mean, I personally am a huge proponent of travel. I don't know about spending 40 years, 11 months in a day, which is, you know, how the portion starts, because that's not traveling, that's wandering for real. And how that changes your whole mindset on what do you view as comfortable, what do you view as good. In fact, Rabbi Drew, I just had a whole flipping the script. Maybe they didn't want to settle down. Maybe they were starting to delay a little bit because they're like, wait a minute, we like these sukkot, these booths. We
Yeah.
like rambling around.
We like being taken care of. We don't have to grow up an adult.
I was still assuming that they were having to do some independent activities.
Yeah, maybe they have to like gather wood for their fires, but nothing. And they clearly still have to tend to their flocks. They've got those, their cattle.
Day-to-day responsibilities.
Yeah. This was Deuteronomy. Next week we have the Etchanan, and I believe it's last week with us.
Yes. My last week, and it'll be in the newsletter, Deb, as well. My last week of a lot of activities is next week. Rabbi Drew and I are trying to figure out how we're going to keep having Chala come along for a little bit longer. And the writing and Deb, all the interviews I've done are starting to come together in little small stories. Which last week we had the one from last week, and that one was
Nikki Ashen.
the story of Nikki
Mhm.
and the rubber bands. Those sort of things I'm still putting together. But yeah, for the most part, will be absent after that. I got to go back to. Oh my goodness, I have to leave my summer sojourn. Still didn't sleep late, but you know, not having classes at 8:30 4 days a week.
That'll be nice for
No,
you.
that's what I'm going back to, and they'll be
Oh,
online.
you are.
Oh yeah,
I-
yeah. That
so
starts.
we won't have you at all then from then on.
Not
And
as
I'll-
much. I'm quite sure that I will come in and out as needed or as appropriate, but in general, I'll be gone.
That's too bad. That's
Yeah.
very sad.
I will miss everyone very much. I have learned so much about grace and different stories and laughter and how to fix athlete's foot, Deb. And it's even though I didn't get to travel to come out to see all y'all, it is a matter of I got to listen and learn, and that has been something I will carry with me for a very long time, even if I don't do what your grandmother suggested. Travel.
I should hope not.
And we'll just leave that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I wish you very much happiness
Thank
and
you.
joy and growth in what you are. When will you be
Ordained.
ordained?
2023, if everything goes well, I will cross that river.
All right, great. You let us know.
Analogy now of crossing over.
We
Mhm.
still have one more week of this.
Yes, I do. I'm not yet.
He's not gone yet.
Absolutely not.
But
And
now,
hopefully,
will you continue with this, Rabbi?
yes, I will.
Oh, good.
This is great,
Yep.
everybody. And thank you, everybody. And till next week.
Thank you.
Until next week, we'll see you and be well and be safe, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.